Welcome, everybody. We are here on an amazing new tech talk. In this occasion, we are going to talk about how to align international standards for data spaces interoperability. And I am glad to be here with all of you. I am Silvia Castelví, responsible director of research and standardization activities on IDSA, but I have the pleasure to have with me Sebastian Steinbuth. Sebastian Steinbuth is our CTO on International Dataspace Association and expert on standardization activities in European and international level. So glad to have you here and share with us your knowledge and experience. Some words, Sebastian? Oh, we cannot hear you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sylvia. And happy to be here with all of you for this tech talk today, and happy to be here on stage with you, Sylvia, because you're also an expert and driving a lot of different standardization activities. So I think this will be a great session. Looking really forward to go through the standardization activities with you together today.
I am learning. I have to admit that when I started on research projects, all of us and we avoid to participate on the standardization activities because it's some kind of mess. And now I am learning. So, and I have to say that it's exciting. So yeah, happy to stay here and share. But first, as I commented, we are participating on several research projects under the European Commission Financial Program. And here you can see some of the projects that we are participating. Some of them are Databricks, the Capo, Agri-Data Value, Datamite, Dataspace Support Center, Veles, Disco, Divine, EnerShare, EU Hubs for Data, Tango, Pleiades, and HIoT. So thanks to these projects and in collaboration with their amazing job, we can offer these tech talks. So let me introduce you first and guide you about through the content that we will have today. And first, I would like to share with you a short introduction about standardization activities, the standardization landscape, and how IDSA is contributing to this. And then I will give the floor to Sebastian to present international standards that IDSA is collaborating. For example, ISO 21551, Eclipse Dataspace Working Group, and of course, the Dataspace Protocol. And before we enter in an open discussion mode, I would like to share with you what is happening now in Europe, because you can keep in mind. So let me start with the introduction. So first, Sebastian has said, our CTO, that we are now at an inflection point in the evolution and adoption of international data spaces. And at this scale, standardization is no longer an option, it's a must. So thank you for participating, for learning, and glad to hear your comments at the end of the session, okay, and your contributions. But first, why we need international standards? This is because when we develop and operate data spaces, there is a challenge how to manage it across governance, business, and technologies domains, but also the challenges affects to all organizations that participates on data spaces, and also the service developers. So international standards allows not only developing data spaces and coping with this challenge, how to make it interoperable, but also international standards benefits we can benefit of them in our daily operation model or daily with the devices device and systems that we are using. As an example, when we call with a mobile phone and we are in another country or outside Europe, we don't care about the communication networks. We call, and the telecom operator, is responsible to assure that our call arrives to the destination despite it's far away from the country that we are. And this is thank you to the interoperability between connectors. So this is what we are doing here regarding international standards for developing and operating data spaces. But first, let me go a little bit on deep on which is the standardization landscape around data spaces. And this could be an incomplete overview or complete, okay? It depends how you look it. But what you see here is four main fields where there are standardization activities, initiatives, working groups. One is around data spaces per se, very important to define principles and characteristics. Another one is how to provide trust on data spaces, how to trust on the parties, the participants on data spaces, and it is bring by the identity standards. Another one is how to understand each other, the semantics, how to make data interoperable. And the last one is how to monetize, how to add value, how to trade the data. This is also an important part. So IDSA, on top of that, is contributing also on how to achieve intra-data spaces interoperability, but also how to define cross-data spaces interoperability. And here you can see our compromise to achieve these standardization activities, because we are directly involved in standardization committees. We are involved from IDSA head office, but also members are actively participating on these committees that you see in blue. But also we have strategic alliance or connections with other standardization committees, with people that is directly participating, also with the European Commission on all these four aspects. And regarding the semantics or the standardization, we are not considering domain-specific standards. You probably know because we have communicated several times. But of course, we support the integration of development of this standard at domain-specific when it is related to the semantics and how to achieve the interoperability. Okay, so let me show you a little bit what is happening very quickly, because I don't want to take too much time, but what is happening on data spaces here. I would like to highlight important activities around data space protocol, and Sebastian will talk about it later, but also the ISO ST38 on data and cloud computing and related technologies. And here there are two important projects that you can see on the slides, and Sebastian will explain also. But then we have Sensenelec at European level that has initiated several activities that we will go on deep later. And of course, data spaces are closely related with digital twins, IoT, artificial intelligence. So we have a strategic alliance in order to assure a smooth integration with these technologies and how to integrate data spaces. And regarding identity and trust, very relevant, very important for data spaces standardization. Here we rely on W3C and these working groups that you can see on the picture on decentralized identity, verifiable claims, and the new data space community group. I encourage you to visit W3C and look to this community group, because it could be interesting if you are interested to participate. But also very important workshop on trusted data transactions, and very relevant the efforts of the European Commission in order to contribute to standardize data spaces, and we will go through it a little bit deep later. Then regarding semantic, I have commented that semantic are very important to understand each other, and also semantic are very relevant in order to establish cross data spaces interoperability, on how to agree on the policies, how to agree on publishing the data, but we will see later more in details how these semantics are considered for data spaces interoperability. And then regarding data trading, there are several initiatives. One of them are from our members of IDSA on the AEEE P3800 on standards for data trading systems led by Japan, and also highlight the efforts of Fireware to implement TM Forum for marketplaces. And if you are wondering at this point how I can contribute, how my company can contribute to standardization activities, this is a call for action, okay? So please, you have two options. One could be join standardization committees and engage through your national body, but also you can join IDSA and contribute with the activities that we are doing, and all these activities that Sebastian will explain part of it are these developments, position paper are considered for standardization committees. But if you are a project, you can also join standardization committees, or you can establish a liaison with standardization committees. You can propose a CENELEC workshop or contribute to STAND ICT project. There are Commission is funding several standardization projects. You can look a short list, or also again as a project you can become member through a company or organization on the project and contribute to the working groups, events, and position papers, okay? And as I commented, this is an incomplete overview of standards, and Sebastian will explain in more details about ST38 standardization activity and in a concrete project, also about trusted data transactions and okay, which is the third one? I forget. Okay, and also the activities. Okay, we expect you to explain all of us. But before, I want to announce you an upcoming standardization paper. And this is really needed. And with our members of IDSA, we are working on this paper in order to provide you a more detailed overview about the data spaces standardization landscape, but also what is needed regarding data spaces interoperability, the Dataspace protocol that Sebastian will explain later, and also the Eclipse Dataspace working group that Sebastian will explain. This was the missing part. But also what is happening at international level on standardization efforts around data spaces, the efforts of the European Commission supporting the creation of data spaces, European projects and initiatives, but also what is happening in Japan, China, USA. So stay tuned and look at the IDSA website for oncoming paper. And now I am very happy to give the floor to Sebastian to explain and illustrate us about these amazing activities around data spaces standardization. Sebastian, floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. Yeah, as you rightly say, so we are all learners in the field of standardization. And but we're doing, and we are happy to share our experience, our insights with all of you, to come up with some good and valid standardization approaches for data spaces. Data spaces are somehow still a new thing, but anyhow, we rely on existing standards already. This is what Sylvia presented so far. I would like to go through a couple of things that we are driving really in the core of data spaces, and how they are connected to everything else that is happening in the digital world. I would like to start, and I suppose that you can see my slides with the work that we're doing on ISO IEC IS 20151 data space concepts and characteristics, which is happening in the committee ISO IEC JTC1 SC38 on cloud computing and distributed platforms. A lot of numbers, and so why do we start there and what are we doing there? I'd like to start with this one. So explaining a little bit, what is this committee? JTC1 SC38 started or was chartered first in 2009 with a focus on distributed application platforms and services, and also SOA, so service-oriented architectures and web services. Some of you might remember those SOA times. And then it was recharted a little bit later, rescoped and retitled to cloud computing and distributed platforms. And I think, well, we all agree that when we talk about data nowadays, we talk about a lot of data that we have and that you somehow have to manage and to process those data. And so making use of cloud concepts in general. Maybe talk about public clouds or private clouds or anything beyond and between. So at least we need this scalability aspect to deal with all this data. And I think we all agree that data spaces are in the end a distributed platform, a distributed system, a decentralized system maybe, but somehow this really fits into this one. But of course, our work here is strongly connected to the whole IoT and edge world. So what is happening in SC41? So this is well connected, of course. So this is a little bit the field where we're working on. So the scope of SC38 is on the standardization, of course, in the area of cloud computing distributed platform, working on foundational concepts and technologies, but also operational issues. And of course, the interactions among cloud computing system and other distributed systems with a focus on system integration in this whole field. And of course, it's well connected to a lot of other standardization activities. So to not come up with a silo, but with a well connected set of standards to use in the end. There's a little bit how and where we started this one. So what is this group working on and how is it structured? So it's a JTC, so a joint technical committee, meaning that it's connected to both international standardizations organization, ISO and IEC together. It's a subcommittee, and we have a couple of ad hoc working groups and advisory working groups. But the main work is done in two of the working groups that exist at the moment, working group 3 on fundamentals and the working group 5 on data. So, and I think it rings at least a bell why we've chosen this group to start working on data spaces. And on the left side, you see a little bit the work program that we have at the moment. Of course, we talk about trustworthiness, which is a relevant aspect also with data spaces, but data spaces is already a topic and a project in this committee. And we have a technical specification, 10866, where I would also like to draw your attention to on organizational autonomy and digital sovereignty. This document is close to be finalized and will be published, and we are preparing another webinar to go really into this document, because this is really super interesting in the end, how to understand the concern of organizational autonomy and digital sovereignty, how to apply it, and how to structure it, because this document also proposes a framework for organizational autonomy and digital sovereignty, how you can assess and apply it. So read the document and stay tuned. We will walk you through this document in a webinar after the summer. Now, but this is a little bit about the group and how it is structured, how it's working, what's the field of work at the moment. It could be much more beautiful, like this one. So this is a poster that was just published a couple of weeks ago in the last plenary in Sao Paulo on the work of SC38. And there you see again the important standards that we're working on there. So it's a set digital sovereignty, organizational autonomy, data spaces, concepts for multi-cloud, for SLAs, for portability and interoperability. So it's also available in beautiful. But let's continue topic-wise. So why did we choose SC30 and why did we choose our path to create an ISO IEC standard in the end for data spaces? Well, because I mean, data spaces are a field of work where you want to exchange data between organizations, where you want to reduce the barriers of trade in the end or of connection between organizations, not only on a national level, but really on international scale. We want to connect in data spaces international organizations exchanging data with regards of really data trading, data marketplaces, but also beyond that to implement data supply chains in the end that happen like physical supply chains on international basis. And therefore, we have this, the World Trade Organization has initiated this technical barriers to trade agreement, and ISO IEC JTC1, especially SC38, but also all the other committees, work under this agreement to provide standards, technical standards that really enable international trade between countries. So they're really important for industry, for governments to rely on, for regulators, because it's a good foundation to really make organizations work with each other. It enables all those technical policy discussions. So the one thing is what we put inside regulations, and the other thing is how to really enable it on a technical way, and all those things. So this is an important reason for us to join those international standardization committees, because we really want to enable the exchange of data across different countries and jurisdictions. So, but let's get a little bit to the content itself. Why do we talk about data spaces in the end? And everyone that is already active in IDSA, well, I don't have to explain you why we talk about data spaces, but we do have to if we talk in such international consortia and gremia, and to explain, so what is new, what did change really? So we find and agree on a couple of really core concepts and concerns. So we understand that data provides only a value when it interacts, when it gets used. If you just lock it away in your database on your hard disk, it doesn't really generate any kind of value. On the other hand side, you're concerned how others will treat and use your data. Or that you will miss out some kind of value generation when you don't share the data and put it together with data from other producers. You want to stay in control of what is happening. This is what we always talk about when we talk about data sovereignty. The main point is here for us, you want to stay in control and you want to have a say what happens to my data after it has left my data center. We need trust, so data spaces are a field that creates trust between participants. I mean, I want to interact with someone and share data, exchange data with someone that I've never met before, maybe. And so what is a foundation that we can trust each other so that someone else will really treat my data well as intended? We need for that a clear governance mechanisms that have to be displayed, rules that apply for us as a club, as a community, as a data space, but also we need to stick to regulations, to international regulations that apply. And finally, well, we want to somehow get into this monetization strategy. So how not only to generate value with the means of efficiency, for example, but also how can I make money out of this? So we are not there yet, but this is at least the future that we are working to. So this is in the end what we are talking about in data spaces. They are used to share data assets in a trusted environment by using an agreed set of policies, models, protocols, and processes in the end. So this is the idea how we structure it at the moment in this standard, in this standardization work. And let me bring you an example, and sorry, I can't hold myself back to talk here also about AI, because, well, it is well suited. AI really needs data. It is fueled by data in the end, and it generates data also afterwards. But as said, you need to somehow control it into both directions. How my data is used on the one hand side, when it is fed into any kind of AI system. On the other hand side, if you consume data from various sources to fuel your AI, you need to rely on those sources in the end. And therefore, we provide with Dataspaces this overarching concepts of policies that we can structure a little bit, all those things of membership policies. So these are the general agreements that you have to sign off before you can join this club, before you can offer or consume data from a data space. Talking about assess policies, who is able to assess metadata and then to understand what kind of offering is there, under which conditions can it be used. Agree on such conditions. Those are the conditions that we both agree on to use data, and then also in the end, how to enforce them practically in the whole data supply chain in the end. So this is a little bit the idea why we need this multi-policy agreement, because there is not this one size fits all. You all know that we have different domains, different use cases, and we have to match somehow which part of terms and conditions go into which kind of policy. But in the end, this is a good fit. And this is one of the really great examples that we need to talk about today when we talk about data spaces, why we need data spaces. Of course, AI, but a lot of use cases beyond AI in the end. So, and this is where we're talking about this data spaces standard, this conceptual standard on data spaces. And we need more. So we have a different variety of standards and parts that we need to really come up in standardization. The one thing are those conceptual standards explaining what is a data space, for example. This is what is happening, for example, in 2151. For example, also in Senelec committees, so happening in Europe, but we also see this happening outside of Europe. So there are other local national standardization activities happening that talk about the conceptual aspects of data spaces, mapping also to national regulations and jurisdictions. And this is one of the reasons why we are working on the paper that Sylvia briefly presented to capture this. So what is the overarching part that we can deal with on an international basis, and what are the national aspects that we have to somehow explain? But beyond those conceptual standards, explaining what is a data space and under which conditions a data space can be utilized. We also need this real technical standards, especially interoperability standards, like we have with the Dataspace protocol. So in the end, you want to have in a data space interoperable systems. You want to easily connect to other partners and exchange data. And this happens with technical systems. So we need an interoperability standard, a multitude of interoperability standards that you can also validate if a given software component is compliant to this technical standard. And here our work is happening a lot at the moment in the Eclipse Dataspace working group, but also in other consortia. And I will go into this one a little bit later on. And of course, the Dataspace protocol is not the only interoperability standard that you might want to use. There are other things. For example, the Dataspace decentralized claims protocol that you want to use to express and utilize claims on top of existing specifications like verifiable credentials. And then, of course, you need interoperable implementations. And there, open source is definitely helpful to bring experience together, to understand how systems can work, to provide blueprints to build data spaces. Those are, for example, the Eclipse Dataspace components. We have great developments in Fireware also, and a lot of other open source developments, but also closed source developments. Not everything, not every system in a data space needs to be open sourced. Of course, commercial solutions may be closed source in the end, but should be compliant to existing standardization. What we're doing beyond the 2151. So I said in the beginning, we have a couple of existing standards that we can utilize when it comes to ecosystems, to data, to interoperability or architecture. So you see there are a lot of standards already existing, starting with 10866. I mentioned this before, on organizational autonomy and digital sovereignty, service level agreement frameworks, guidance for policy developments, and interacting with cloud service partners. All such standards exist already, so we don't have to recreate such things. Also on data, existing standards can be reused from the field of ISO IEC, but also, as we also presented before, what's happening in this whole semantic world inside the World Wide Web Consortium, for example. We have interoperability standards that we can rely on. 19941 when it comes to the cloud systems. We have similar standards also when it comes to the IoT and edge world. We have existing standards to talk about interoperability and portability. And finally, also on architecture, starting with terminology, concepts, and reference architecture, the edge computing landscapes, concepts for multi-cloud and taxonomy for digital platforms. So we have a lot of existing work where we really can rely on. So as one says, we are really standing on the shoulders of giants here. What we're doing in the Dataspace characteristics, and just explain. So a lot of things exist already. So why do we need just another standard? In 2151, we will have some core characteristics that I think you will see that we talk about this for a while. Metadata is shared while the data remains stored at the source in the first place, and then interactions, the data transfer is later on always peer-to-peer. The term was that we are a participant in a data space, meaning you have to adhere to contracts, policies, and so on. Data spaces are agnostic of infrastructure, could be run on premises, on the edge, in the cloud, whatever. The policy concepts, value-added services that really create value out of the data afterwards, but also talking about things like the goals, general concepts, and the defining terminology that needs to be aligned with all the other standardization activities that are happening. Maybe talking also a little about the components that you need to start, and also some deployment considerations. So this is happening. What is happening in 2151? The group is working on that, and we have already a pretty good first draft that we are working on it, and are progressing with this. So to understand a little bit how this moves, so this is a picture that I use from ISO on the deliverables that you create. So you start with a new work proposal, and we have done this with our Dataspace concepts and characteristics standards. So it's not only a proposed work item, a new work item proposal, but we are really working now on the first draft of the document. So building the consensus in this group, and the next step will be then to bring it to the wider audience and get feedback from the committee and beyond before we can really move to the sixth stage here on the publication of international standards. So this is our goal, and we want to have this achieved in the next year. So we are working on this with high pressure to come up with a good standard, because, well, this is not all new. We have worked on the content for years, and it has already achieved a great degree of maturity. So I think we can really move pretty fast through this process in the end. So this is about 2151. And then the other approach that I would bring to your attention also is another activity that we're doing when we are moving through the open source developments, utilizing the Eclipse Dataspace working. The Eclipse Dataspace working group is a new working group inside Eclipse with a strong focus on data spaces. So the Eclipse Foundation, if you don't know them yet, it's really a huge, large open source organization with more than 400 projects, more than 300 members. We have more than 2,000 committers there, so people actively working on all those different developments. So this is really huge and really helpful, because it really provides a great governance scheme to collaborate and develop open source projects, including specifications like we do with the Dataspace protocol. So the position is a little bit on this value line. So you need a given governance scheme to collaborate, then you can enable collaborations between partners and also competitors, different vendors of open source contributions. So you collaborate, and then if you have a good and common foundation that you agree on, then you can build products and get into the competition, get into the market, and provide great solutions for everyone. So this is a little bit where the Eclipse Foundation is positioned, really on providing a good governance to foster collaboration to come up with something together. And there we've established, I will skip this one, the Eclipse Dataspace Working Group with a clear vision and scope that this working group wants to provide specifications and open source software to act as a foundation for data spaces in the end. So to bring minimum solutions that you need, especially when it comes to interoperability for the data exchange. So you will find the scope and the vision and in the charter of the working group, and you can read all the details on your own, but I would like to draw your attention to the 3 fields of work that we have there identified. First pillar is core and protocols. So to develop core protocol specifications and standardize them. And this is, well, for example, the Dataspace protocol, but also support the development of industry-grade software like data planes, components that you can use and utilize to join as a participant in a data space. But also the third pillar, maybe you're not a participant in a data space, but you are the one that organizes, that manages such a data space. So you're a data space governance authority. And then you need management tools also for that, to manage your members, to manage your policies. And we also want to support the erection of those systems that can be reused for building and setting up data spaces. This is our focus. And especially when it comes to specification, we understand today that we need this specification stack. So we need some base protocols dealing with things like catalog functionalities. And here I'm not talking about a catalog as a technical component where everyone dumps metadata inside, but more in the sense of the DCAT standard. So I offer my data catalog, and this is my listing of all the cool endpoints and data assets that I can provide. Contract negotiation and management of the data transfer. We need on top of that different bindings. In the Dataspace protocol, we have at the moment a binding to the HTTP protocol, but it could be extended to bindings to other technical or wire protocols like MQTT, gRPC, whatever you want to use. This is agnostic in the first place of all those identity and claims part, because maybe you want to inject different functionalities to manage claims. And therefore, on top of that, we come up with claim protocols, and on top of that, policy and credential profiles. So what is inside those claims, how it is structured. And therefore, we have started in the Dataspace working group 2 new projects, 2 new specification projects, the Dataspace decentralized claims protocol, and on top of that, to fill in some content, the conformity assessment policy and credential profiles. This is a little bit the field of work, and today I will not go into the details of our Dataspace protocol. If you're interested in more details on what the Dataspace protocol is, how it works, what it really contains, please visit our recorded webinar on the Dataspace protocol that we had in the November of the last year, where we explained all the details. But just to wrap it up briefly, what we described there is a so-called control plane. So the thing that is really reusable across different data spaces, where you can, as a participant, have a foundation to connect to a multitude of different data spaces, dealing with the main parts, cataloging, contract negotiation, and then the management of the data transfer, where it hands over to existing data planes that manage the wire protocols and manage the actual data transfer or sharing, exchange, sending code to data, whatever you want to implement. So this is a little bit the idea. And so this is not too new in the end. So it does not come out of the blue that we just sat there in November last year and said, well, we need a Dataspace protocol, let's use this. So we started with an IDSA, with this concern of interoperability in and between data spaces years ago. And our first approach was starting with a so-called IDSA Plugfest, when people sat together with their computers and their implementations and tried to make some interoperable work with them together by sitting in a room, later on sitting together remotely. And as a first outcome out of that, we had this so-called IDSA communication guide in the version 1 that just explains to technical developers, this is what you need to implement and what you need to build to be interoperable between each other. And then we worked on that. So we had various activities in IDSA to pilot, to test, to get feedback, to fail also with the communication guide and to learn with that. And then we started with a Dataspace protocol. It started first as a new version of the communication guide, but we realized we can shrink it really to the utmost minimum in the Dataspace protocol in 2022, and have been working on that in 2023. And in March of this year, we released the final or stable version, the version 1, 2024-1, of the Dataspace protocol. And now we're moving it to the Eclipse Foundation to make it an Eclipse project, because what we want to achieve is that we are following this Eclipse specification project with the specification document that we as IDSA with our members have created as a good and stable specification. But IDSA does not write code. But what we need is now a testing suite, a TCK, a technology compatibility kit. So we need a test kit where you can easily test, is my implementation compliant to the Dataspace protocol or not? A simple test suite that you can use inside your own systems in your CI/CD pipeline, or you can utilize a third-party evaluation where a third party evaluates, yes, your component is compliant to that. And following the Eclipse specification process, we will also need at least one compliant implementation. So it's not a reference implementation, but we need at least one compatible implementation. And if you follow our data connector report, well, we have something like 36 candidates to be compliant implementations. But we have those projects in place with the specification project for the Dataspace protocol, the TCK. This project is started and active. And we have at least one compliant implementation at the moment directly here in the group, which is the Eclipse Dataspace components. So following the specification process, we will finalize those three parts, have the specification document, a TCK, and at least one compatible implementation. And then we can release this as a specification, as a final specification from this Eclipse specification process project. And this will be utilized as a so-called path submission towards ISO IEC to make this one also an ISO IEC standard in the end. That is our plan that we have, and where we're in the middle here, utilizing the Eclipse Dataspace working group to come up with a good and stable release of something that all of you can use to build interoperable data spaces and move this also to international standardization in the end. So this is the idea. And those things that I presented, well, they just fit very well together. 2151 is describing the overarching concept, the concept, what is a data space as a conceptual standard. So you can identify, do I have a data space or do I not have a data space? And I like this analogy with this great NIST standard on cloud computing, where you can have very clear characteristics to understand. Do I have a data space or do I have not a data space? Is my Raspberry Pi on my desk with an internet connection a cloud or is it not a cloud? So this is an understanding that we have. And then on the other hand side, you want to know if you're compliant to such a standard from participant perspective. So you need interoperability standards. For example, with the Dataspace protocol, so that you can show, yes, I am as a participant compliant to join such a data space in the end. This is a frame that we are constructing. And of course, what we can then inject afterwards in the middle here are all those, well, national standards like we have, for example, in trusted data transactions that typically should run in a data space or could run a data space. So a data space could provide a great framework for national standards, and you can show interoperability also to such national standards with being compliant to the Dataspace protocol. That is a little bit the idea that we have. In the end, well, the devil is in the detail, and it's still a lot of complex work to be done. But this is our plan, and this is how we move it forward at the moment. And of course, all of you are invited to join us on this journey, to support our work here and to move forward. And before closing, I would like to have my special thanks to Jeff and Anish for supporting me also here in the slides. And I think with that, I'm run a little bit out of time and hand back to you, Sylvia.
Thank you, Sebastian. Very interesting and insight content, very useful content, as always. But I am now I want to share with you what is happening now in Europe. I will try to be very brief because I see some questions on the chat. So I want to share with you, we are going to share the slides. So the content that I am going to present, we go very fast. But what is happening now? I have highlighted three main actions. There are more. Okay, one is the report on data interoperability from the high-level forum. I invite to see you. Another one is Sensenelec, two activities under Sensenelec. The focus group on data, data spaces, cloud, and edge that has the objective to identify standardization needs and gaps. And the third one is the workshop on trusted data transaction that is raising a lot of interest and providing also concepts and mechanisms on the field of data exchange as a foundationals, okay? But then where this comes, as probably you know, the European Commission has defined a strategy for standardization, and part of this strategy, the Union Work Program for European Standardization, every year publish the actions that are needed. And for this year, there is one action that is the Trusted Data Framework. And this here you can see the specification for this Trusted Data Framework, but is what is important from this action that based on the rolling plan for ICT standardization and also the high-level forum on a standardization report that I have commented, we identify three key actions that affects to data spaces standardization: the trusted data transactions standardization, establishing a data space scorecard that includes a scorecard or maturity model for data spaces interoperability, and also establishing bodies providing guidelines, and this is the purpose of the focus group. You can see here a specific objective of this annual Union Work Program on Trusted Data Framework, but very relevant, the role of the common European data spaces and the need for ensuring interoperability across data spaces. And as Sebastian has explained it, this is our commitment from IDSA, how to contribute to this interoperability that is key. Here, you can look into the report on concrete actions for from the data interoperability report. I am not going to on detail. And then, as I commented, Sensenelec ICT Standardization Policy Committee, Advisory Committee, proposed to create a Sensenelec focus group on data spaces, cloud, and edge. This focus group was had the kickoff meeting on March, and last month we had, or it was the third meeting, and is under discussion because this is a pre-standardization activity that has the purpose to identify, analyze current activities on standardization and identify needs and gaps, okay? And these are the deliverables that this focus group plan to deliver on the next 2 years, but here you can find the description of another important activity under Sensenelec, the workshop on trusted data transactions. IDSA is part of this group. Here we are establishing the terminology and describing concept and mechanisms for establishing the foundations to understand how to execute trusted data transaction. And we have finalized the first part that will be published soon. And now we are working on the second part in order to identify attributes. And you will find this document available on the Senelec website. Please visit it. And before entering on a discussion model, I would like to encourage you, because this is also a very relevant and very important activities in order to achieve semantic interoperability, is the third edition that we are organizing this activity in collaboration with key partners and projects that you can see the logos here. And despite, if you want to submit a position paper, it's a little bit late, but please contact us and let's see if it's possible still to present the paper. You can contact Olga or me for that. And with that, I will move to the question and answer part, because I have already seen, and I invite Sebastian to come back. I have already see some questions on the chat, but if you want to unmute and ask the questions or raise your hand, please. Bruno, do you want to ask? Or okay, I will ask you, Sebastian. Bruno, here, please, Bruno. Go ahead if you can unmute yourself and ask directly and comment. You have already, sorry, I missed that you already answered the questions.
Yeah, so maybe you can raise your hand again, Bruno. Then I can find you more easily in the list of attendees to allow you to unmute. Perfect. So should work now for you.
Hello, Sebastian and Sylvia. Thank you for this interesting talk. Yes, I have already sent some comments and questions on the chat. Perhaps another one is about the fact that you said that you will not target the semantic interoperability in the domain, in the verticals. So I see a gap between what we are doing in the standardization in the domain, for instance, in the energy domain, and what is standardized at the data space level. So I think we need some kind of articulation between the two to enable and to, let's say, all the scope of interoperability. What is your thinking about that, Sebastian?
Yes, thanks for that question. And you're not the first one to ask and to think about this. This is a really relevant point. What I have typically in mind when thinking about interoperability is that we have, with this European interoperability framework, we have provided those 4 layers of interoperability: technical, semantic, organizational, and legal interoperability. And also, if we take a look into 19941, we have 5, not 4 layers, but it's similar in the end. And so in the end, we need to distinguish interoperability in at least those 4 layers. What we do with a Dataspace protocol is more or less on the technical interoperability part. A little bit also on semantic interoperability, but mainly on technical interoperability. But you're right, we need this semantic interoperability part also to be really to provide interoperable data spaces. And what we as IDSA can do, we can provide some core fundamentals to describe what is such a data asset. Sometimes we talk also about a data product. Personally, I don't like this term, but this is another discussion. But you know what I'm talking about. So you somehow need to describe data as a tradable, exchangeable asset, and it has some common attributes, some common understanding that we need to share. And then on top of that, we come with a semantic part for the data itself. You need to understand, we need to provide meaningful data that you can understand, that you can utilize. And in your examples, in the energy domain. And this needs standardization. You're absolutely right. So we need something like a good governance scheme for that to come up with well-defined schemata that you can use inside your domain that are reliable and stable. Because the one thing, it's easy to create a simple vocabulary and to publish it, but it needs to be maintained. You will implement it in your system, and if the developer of the vocabulary just decides to rename an attribute to do something, well, then you're the stupid one and you have to follow. So you need really a good governance for that. And this is missing a little bit at the moment in the standardization world, because we still have some struggles. I think we have some good and best practices how to approach this, but there is something missing. This is one part of the focus group that Sylvia briefly presented, the Sentinel-like focus group on data spaces, cloud, and edge. Where we want to discuss and understand better. So what kind of other means can we utilize to come up with standards? And here semantics is one of the important parts here that we should consider how to come up with a good governance scheme. So this is one field where we discuss this, because you're right, we need this. And the other thing is I can warmly invite you to the 3rd iteration of our workshop, Semantics and Data Spaces, because this is where we're talking about this since, well, 2 workshops we had already in the last year and the year before, and we have our 3rd one. because we are looking for a good governance. How can we establish good governance that is spanning across domains, especially for semantic models? So I don't have the answer, but I can just underline, yes, this is an issue and we need to work on that.
Meanwhile, Bruno, it's great the job that you are doing on Omega X, developing energy ontologies, and we have already discussed it to present this work on this semantic interoperability workshop. ADF could be a good contributor to the workshop. Okay, thank you, Bruno.
Yeah, by the way, hi Alex, good to see you again. Saw your comment in the chat that the large language models will cover the rest. Well, maybe yes. In fact, some industries will not rely on guessing that what you provide is the right thing. Maybe you want to have a very clear and exact answer that goes beyond guessing. At least when I visit my medical doctor to get health advice, I hope that he or she is not guessing but has a real strict answer. So what I want to say is you're right. AI large language models can definitely support in this matching between vocabularies, but that's not the whole answer.
We have another question. Sorry, I cannot understand the name, but I don't know. Your Dataspace interoperability and semantic projects are collaborating with CPSB AP in Europe. I don't know what is it. You know what is? Naho Kitano. Thank you.
Hi. So this is a core public service vocabulary, the application profile for that.
Okay.
So, well, no. So that is, again, not something that is specific to IDSA, because here we are talking about vocabulary for public services, which is definitely a relevant field of work. But this is, again, something that is domain application specific. So, of course, what our job in IDSA is to have a good overview, that we don't have conflicts with a lot of things, but we want to rely on some core standards that should be a foundation for all the implementations. Like what we utilize is DCAT. And I must admit, I'm not too deep into the core public domain, public service vocabulary. I don't know exactly if it relies on DCAT AP version 2 or something like this. And those are exactly those challenging questions that we have to understand in the next future. So what is existing and how can we harmonize or bring things together in the end?
We have a couple of minutes more. Any last questions? Interested in joining? Okay. Okay, so.
Well, just to get back to the last question. Yes, ontologies, it's definitely a good thing to help. So I'm not allowed to use this term Wild West for semantic interoperability anymore, but this is what it is at the moment. And let me explain this, why I say this. We have a broad set of existing ontologies and vocabularies, which is great because people do utilize this work. And I mean, I'm also not the youngest anymore. When I started with my professional career and talked about semantic interoperabilities, about ontologies and reasoning, people looked at me and said, well, you're crazy. This will never, ever fly and no one will ever use it. I think this changed. So it has industrial acceptance and it's being used and built. And so I think we need to switch the question around a little bit, not to ask, so how can my ontology, may it be a good one or a bad one or something in between, be connected to this one, but how to come up with some mechanism, with some core mechanisms, how to reuse and reutilize such ontologies that we have. I think it's good that we have them, and it opens up broad field how to better utilize data in the end. But there are a couple of questions connected to this, and this is why it's not easy to have a very clear answer on that. I think we need a good governance mechanism for that to manage such ontologies, but the question is how you want to adopt them in the end, because it has a multitude of cross-cutting and concerns and non-functional aspects. What I want to say is, if you have a data space that deals with maybe a lot of data from different sources, and everyone still utilizes its own data scheme, but then you have to translate it to the common scheme that is used in the data space. Well, of course, it's easy. There are tools that can do this job easily for you, but in the end, they do consume a lot of energy as well, and it takes time. It needs computing resources. So maybe you want to do this, and you have a good reason to just keep your own model inside your domain and do this translation. Each and every time. Of course, we can do that, but it has a huge CO2 footprint in the end, a huge carbon footprint. Maybe we have to think, so we need to come up with a standardized data set, a data scheme that will be utilized in the whole domain because it just makes sense. And we have good examples, for example, in the tourism industry, where organizations are working on creating a collaborative, a joint model that they can utilize for all the tourism data. And this is a very specific understanding, and this is why we need to enable those standardization activities on those domain models on ontologies, because it has a multitude of effects that we need to consider. So of course, the one question is, how can we connect all the existing things that we have to a data space and utilize in a data space? We have some good answers for that. Please visit also our publication on semantic interoperability in data spaces, where we explain some of those concepts. But in the end, the other part is we need a good governance. We need good standardization activities for semantic interoperability.
Thank you, Sebastian. And yeah, and thank you, Eric, and all of you for your comments on the chat. And thank you all for attending. And before we leave, I would like, if you are not a part of IDSA yet, I will motivate you to go our website, where you will find how to apply, how to become members. I hope that you are enthusiastic to contribute and collaborate to make data spaces real and standardized. Thank you for participating, and the slides and the recording will be available on the website. Thank you all.
Thanks, Sylvia. Thanks all. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a nice day.